Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash. This week, we're taking a look at glass in the 16th century, and it seems that while glass has existed for centuries before William Shakespeare, the use for it in what museum archives call a vessel glass, okay? And that would be like, this is my coffee cup, but you think about a juice glass that's clear, okay, that you drink out of. A vessel glass, or colloquially, the drinking glass, is a fuzzy subject for 16th century England. When Shakespeare went down to the pub for a pint, did he use a glass the way we think of them today? I wanted to find out. So this week we're taking a look at, did Shakespeare use a drinking glass? When I checked into Encyclopedia Britannica, my generally first stop on investigating anything historical, it was their opinion that the whole subject of vessels and drinking glasses is actually a section of history that hasn't been given enough attention, especially for 16th century England in particular. But here's what they did say. Glass was a big industry in England. It had come over to England and had been really popular during the Middle Ages, but it was primarily used for church windows. And I'm actually going to assume they were used for the windows in homes and buildings too. I'm basing that assumption on there having been glass in Shakespeare's birthplace when I visited Stratford-upon-Avon. So apparently, church windows, house windows, that was a big industry, but investigating the window industry is for another episode. Today, what I do know is that while they were crafting the glass for the windows, they did build it into a vessel for drinking liquids. So the idea of a glass that could have liquid poured into it and be drank out of was in existence during Shakespeare's lifetime. And in fact, Shakespeare's plays give mention to drinking from a glass several times. Falstaff, in particular, mentions a glass for drinking. But it does seem unlikely that Shakespeare himself would have used a glass to drink out of, at least not regularly. And here's why. There were two types of glass manufacturing that were in development in England during Shakespeare's lifetime. There was the German way, and there was the Italian way. The German way relied on wood and potash to form the glass, and while their biggest production was window glass, they also put together a lot of drinking vessels, and they had a lot of different shapes and styles and designs. The most popular was a kind of tumbler, which got decorated with notches and circles that were drawn into the glass. Now, this German production method was pushed out of favor in 1608 because England got scared about deforestation. Apparently, there was a lot of cutting down trees in order to produce the glass in this German production method. And so, since the German production method relied so heavily on the burning of wood, it was replaced by the more forest-friendly Italian approach that did not require wood. In fact, in 1615, using wood to produce glass was specifically outlawed in England. The international Venetian style of glass arrived in England when Italian craftsmen came over. Now, you'll remember this theme of Italian craftsmen coming over to England to train people in their craft because we talked about it with sword masters and the training of Italian rapier fencing. You can find that bonus episode down in the link below today's episode. But the 16th century was the golden age for Venetian glassmaking in Murano, Italy specifically. There were at least 28 glassmaking furnaces there in 1581, and collectors of this Murano glass included Henry VIII of England, Pope Clement VII, King Ferdinand of Hungary, Francis I of France, and Philip II of Spain. The glassmakers were so popular that this crystalline method of glass making developed into the word we have in English for this type of glass called crystal. Another word for this Italian glass was crystalline. Both crystal and crystalline appear in Shakespeare's plays. In his play Cymbeline, Shakespeare uses crystalline to describe the material out of which Jupiter builds the palace. It's in Act 5, Scene 4. Glass history in general, and yes, that's a real subject of history, a real department or grouping. There are people who study the history of glass, and that general group of people credit English glass merchant George Ravenscroft with the creation of the crystal as we know it today. You may remember that crystal as we know it today was a lead-based glass, and the lead oxide was added to the glass to make it stronger. And that is what we think of as crystal today, but this 17th century version of crystal glass was a new thing after Shakespeare's lifetime, but the word crystal existed well before Shakespeare and well before George Ravencroft made the crystal with lead that we think of today. It was actually a mineral in Anglo-Saxon times. They called it crystal, and they thought it was a kind of petrified ice. Now, that's not what it was, but the word crystal was used in Anglo-Saxon times well before William Shakespeare, and it was used as a shortened form of the phrase crystal glass in the 1590s. It was also used as an adjective from the late 14th century. So Shakespeare has a lot of historical precedents for including the word crystal, crystalline, and glass, which appear in over 20 places in his plays. But intriguingly, despite the historical precedent Shakespeare has to have used this from any number of the very old history sources we know Shakespeare used to write his plays, the fascination with glass, and specifically Italian glass and crystalline, also appears to be a slice from Shakespeare's life in particular. But did Shakespeare actually drink from a vessel made of this Italian crystal? Well, we know from the words in Shakespeare's plays that the bard was at least familiar with the glass as a drinking vessel. Touchstone says in As You Like It, Act 5, that for it is a figure in rhetoric that drink being poured out of a cup into a glass by filling the one doth empty the other. Now that's very philosophical, but it shows that glass was used to hold a liquid. Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 2 says, glasses, glasses is the only drinking. Now, there's a lot going on with Falstaff there, but again, it makes the connection between glass and drinking. Henry VIII in Act 1, the Duke of Buckingham says, to this last costly treaty, the interview that swallowed so much treasure and like a glass did break in the rinsing. Now, that is an indication of what George Ravencroft was trying to solve in the late 1600s by adding lead to crystal glass to make it more stable. Glass was, during Shakespeare's lifetime, likely very, very fragile. While Shakespeare didn't eat breakfast the way we think of it today, so he wouldn't have had like his morning orange juice in a glass, we do know that Shakespeare would have drank ale, possibly mead, or some kind of alcohol like whiskey. And I wanted to know, would he have drank that from a glass? Well, the story of a whiskey drinking vessel in particular starts in the 16th century, so that was promising information, but it starts with a wooden cup. Whiskey was typically drank from a wooden cup, and they were used to drink Scotch whiskey in particular. That has a connection between Shakespeare and James I, because as you know, James I is the King of Scotland before he was King of England. Now, during the 1500s, the only cup used to drink whiskey was known as the Cach, and it's spelled Q-U-I-A-C-H, and I am not 100% sure that I'm doing the Gaelic justice there, which is why I took the time to spell it for you. Go and look that up. But it was derived from a Gaelic word that meant cup. The design looked a lot like a shallow bowl with handles sticking out of the side, and what's really wild about this is it was designed after a bowl that exists in England and the Netherlands in medicinal circles. It was the bowl that they would catch the blood in when you were bloodletting someone to try and cure them of a disease. This was the design that the Scottish people used for their whiskey drinking vessel. And I think that that says a ton about the hardiness and generally rough reputation of the Scottish, and while they were so formidable to so many. But they were mostly made of wood. After they were made of wood, sometimes they would be made of silver, but I couldn't find any instances of where the whiskey cup would have been made of glass. I can't find any instances where the whiskey cup would have been made of glass. It was only made of wood or silver. So for William Shakespeare, I think it was primarily made of wood, as that's the traditional way to make it. It would have been the most commonly available one. So to wrap things up here this week, it seems that while glass vessels and even glass drinking vessels were in existence during Shakespeare's lifetime, they weren't very stable, they were very fragile, and so they probably wouldn't have been very popular. The most popular version that the bard would have most likely used would have been a wooden cup or perhaps a leather one. Whether he enjoyed a dram of ale, it wouldn't have been a glass one. That's it for this week. If you're interested in the history of drinking glasses in the 16th century and learning more about that, as well as to see pictures of the wooden drinking vessels and the Italian Cristallo glass, be sure that you check out the show notes for today's episode at castycash.com/crystal. That's CassidyCash.com/CRYSTAL. Until next time, I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Bye-bye.